If you tell young people consistently, oh, you're not enough, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're limiting their perspective, you're limiting their hopes for what they can and cannot do.
So in just like conversations with family, like being dismissed really easily because it's like, oh, you're young, you don't know what you're talking about, even though if it's a topic like I've done research on or I've read on, it's just like me being automatically dismissed as like my point being not as valuable as like other people in the family just because I'm the youngest, I'm the child.
When you're a certain age or when you're young in age, you tend to not have that authority.
The arrogance that adults have, I think sometimes that they know best, I think is fairly narrow, and it's ultimately doesn't really serve the community that well. Young people bring out the very best in old people.
Well, adultism is when you're referring to ageism.
I feel like age groups is more of a social thing, just especially because of like generational like experiences. Like someone from the 60s experienced America differently than I'm experiencing it now. Everyone has different needs, but also like again, there's like this generational element. Like I was thinking like research I've done in the past was like post 9/11, just like that collective trauma as like a generation and how that it has affected the way that generation has dealt with traveling or like trauma with flying and just like things like how these bigger events are just like affected like certain generations more than others. Like thinking about what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, like how that has affected a lot of my friends, maybe not necessarily more than other generations, but as people growing up witnessing this, especially like the election year that we had, I feel like there's certain collective like experiences that each generations have which shift what they need.
I think I was just programmed, or I guess conditioned by my environment to believe that as a young person I am inferior than adults, I know less than adults do, I have less possibilities than adults do.
Since I didn't have the language to describe it, I knew what I was feeling, couldn't describe it, just like in a way kind of downplayed it because I didn't know if it was an actual thing or just me like overthinking or like, oh yeah, I felt weird this one instance, but like kind of brushing it past. But once I got the language for it, helping identify really helped to just validate that experience.
You're too naive.
Oh, you don't know.
You don't know enough.
You haven't been in the real world yet.
You don't have the experience.
I come from like a Korean-ish culture where there's like a very strict structure of seniority. So if someone is older than you, like 1 year, 2 years even, you have to show respect. You have to speak in a specific tone. There's some, like when they give you something, you have to take it with 2 hands, that kind of stuff. But since I'm ethnically Korean living in China, that kind of just like is not as enforced, but I know that.
So as founder of Lighten of Puerto Rico, which was my humanitarian initiative that I launched after Hurricane Maria, I interacted with countless adults and countless people who sort of saw me in a different light because I was just 15 at the time. I remember multiple instances calling to order shipments of solar lamps or hand-powered washing machines and saying, "Hi, I'm Salvador Gómez-Colón, I'm from Puerto Rico, I'd like to order let's say like 30,000 units of X lamp." And that's an order worth around like $30,000. And then they'd be like, is this a minor? And I'd be like, yeah. So they're like, can I speak to an adult? And even though I tried to, make my voice deeper and hide the fact that I was young, because I knew that it would bring a different result, I was always still foiled, and they'd always be like, can I speak to an adult? And I always have to get my mom sort of resigned.
We can internalize adultism, especially when thinking about power dynamics, even from like parent and child, especially like I feel like it manifests in different ways depending on like how you grew up and what culture. Like for me, I know like it was interesting making eye contact with teachers here, like teachers asking me to make eye contact, because in my household that's like me trying to fight or like challenge the authority of a parent or an older person, like at school with like principal, student, teacher, student. And it was just interesting coming here to Andover where there was a shift, I feel like, with teachers, like feeling like, oh, I am genuinely, almost they talk to me as if I was like their equal. And I was really surprised. It was like they asking me about my weekend. I'm like, you genuinely care? You're just not going to tell me instructions or tell me what to do and then that's it, leave it at that.
I think there's something about it. We're conditioned to believe the same way we're conditioned to believe that we cannot do enough and that we have, hundreds of times less potential than adults do. I think we're also conditioned to believe, or sort of our instinct is, we have to prove ourselves, always. Whether it's in academics, whether it's in activism, research, extracurriculars, everything. I think one of the people to whom I really look up is a dear friend of mine called Fionn Ferreira. He's Irish. He's currently studying in the Netherlands. But when he was, I believe, 15, so about the same age I started Light and Hope, he was always a science freak. He liked doing experiments. He liked doing all sorts of things with his hands and finding solutions. And he magnetized ferrofluid, which is the little liquid that you use that's inside water, and sort of you put a magnet in it, sticks out. He's using that to remove microplastics from water. And he's received many, very large quantities of money, which I cannot disclose, from big corporations. He's get offers to buy his patents. Another example I can think of, whose space is not necessarily as conducive. Another friend of mine, Autumn Pelletier. She's an indigenous. She's 15 years old now. Indigenous teenager from Canada, or from what is currently known as Canada, from the Ashibanic Nation. She basically, when she was 12, her aunt died. Her aunt was the chief water commissioner of her indigenous nation. And she just had this, she felt this impulse, and everyone in her native community saw her aunt in her. So she becomes the chief water commissioner of the Ashibanic Nation, which is pretty large, a few thousand people in it. And she was 13, and she goes and meets with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and basically tells him, the state of water infrastructure in Indigenous communities in Canada is abysmal, and we need to work on it. And ever since, she's been a very strong voice, not only in Canada, but around the world, for Indigenous rights and the access to infrastructure by Indigenous people.
For me, it took a while to learn, especially because, again, culture and just like the way I was raised, that like respect and trust should be earned rather than just like automatic to someone just because of their age, just because of like their position of power.
I think intergenerational collaboration is one of the most important tools we have in our sort of toolbox for creating social change and social progress, because adults have the tangible experience, but then young people have the vision. And this perspective that is unjaded. And I think when you see an adult tell you, when you hear an adult tell you, oh, you can do this, go for it. It's fighting. I think they're accepting the fact that adultism really exists, and they're telling you, I'm not complicit in it. I want you to succeed. I don't want this to hold you back.
Yes, I think the recognition is important, and sometimes when young people don't have that can disrupt their mental health.
I've been around and I've been really lucky to be part of communities where young people are so curious and so motivated. It is a common occurrence for a group of adults to have a set of ideas and introduce them to students here at Andover and be blown away that these kids typically take those ideas and manipulate them and transform them and make them better.
Adults do have more experience than the younger people, that's no question. They've lived longer. But I think that as people grow up, you become more faded and you become more susceptible to falling into the lines of the systems in which you operate. You see how a lot of social movements are led by young people, because young people understand, they're growing up, but even as they're growing up, they understand that things don't always have to be the way they are, and that there is a better way forward. And I think that that's what young people bring to the table. They bring a perspective that's new, that's fresh, and that I do not think is mutually exclusive with adults' experiences. I think that they can both work in conjunction very well together.
I think it's fascinating that adolescents actually feel emotions more deeply than adults. That's how they're wired. So their anger is more angry. Their love is fiercer, their sadness is deeper. Their joy is fuller. In every way, when they feel things, it's to a greater extreme or extent. Understanding that psychological dynamic is important, and so when I'm working with young people who are really angry or really hurting, it's helpful to have the perspective and knowledge as an adult to understand, one, that their pain and their anger is absolutely real, not to deny it, but to have the perspective that they're feeling it more poignantly right now. And so I've gotten to a place now where if I'm in an electric setting, if you will, where I'm with young people, that it's really important to listen, but it's not necessarily always the best context to make decisions or choices or necessarily engage in argument or debate. That sometimes it's important to just let young people feel and emote and express, and then return back to the conversation, give them space and time to process, perhaps ask a few questions that makes them pause or think a little bit, but then be able to return and keep returning to the conversation and see how it evolves over time. I think there's a softening that can happen. And I think also there's an awakening that can happen in adults. I think adults can be kind of numb to emotions sometimes in ways that doesn't serve either. So I think on some level, they can feed each other.
Please open spaces. Keep your ears open, keep your eyes open. Stay willing to change, stay willing to hear new ideas and hear new perspectives. Because humanity moves forward only when we innovate, when we have new ideas. So unless we want to stay stagnant, which I don't think many of us do, be willing to change, be willing to innovate, be willing to hear from young people.
Find adults or just peers, people who care about the same things that you do. Just because I know what has helped me stay motivated in pursuing the social justice things that I do have been faculty, just adults who genuinely care, who do give their students space, just to exist, but also to talk and value their opinions, even if they're younger than them. So it just helps to, when engaging in that conversation, really helps to feel powerful and validated in one's experiences.
And to young people, I'd say, just don't stop. I know you might feel tempted to say, oh, well, you're telling us that, we have to prove ourselves. You don't necessarily have to always prove yourselves, but just follow your devotion, follow what you think you want to do, and just do it. And don't let other people's expectations, or other people's thoughts about what you'll do, keep you from doing anything.